My mate cast me into the desert, a useless omega with no value. He never dreamed I was a master healer who would one day return at the head of an army to take his throne. The lie tasted like bitter roots and rebellion. Every morning, it was the same ritual. An elder from the Stone Fang pack would bring her the ceremonial fertility tonic, a sweet, cloying liquid that was supposed to make her womb quicken. Samira would drink it down, smiling her thanks, her face a perfect mask of obedience. But then, the moment the elder was gone, she would pull a small leather pouch from its hiding place beneath a loose stone in the floor. Inside were the dried, bitter leaves of the moonshadow plant. She would chew them, the acrid taste flooding her senses, and swallow the pulp with a grim finality. The moonshadow was her secret, her defiance, her cage and her freedom, all in one. It ensured she would remain barren. She did it because her mate, Alpha Marcus, was a cruel man who ruled a cruel pack. He believed a legacy was a chain forged of blood and bone, passed from father to son. But Samira saw the rot in his chain. She saw the fear in the eyes of her people, the casual brutality, the hollow honor. And she would rather die than bring a child into that. As if summoned by her thoughts, she heard his heavy footsteps approaching. Her heart skipped. She quickly hid the pouch, her hands trembling. No matter how hard she tried to be brave, his presence always brought a chill to the air. He entered her chambers without knocking. He was a big man, powerful, but he moved with a predator's coiled stillness. His eyes, the color of chips of ice, swept the room before landing on her. "Another moon waxes, Samira," he said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't need to say more. "The ancestors will bless us when the time is right, my Alpha," she replied, the words a familiar, empty script. He walked toward her, his shadow falling over her. "The ancestors," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Do not lead this pack. I do, and my legacy requires an heir." Under the weight of his stare, she felt small, like a mouse cornered by a hawk. He reached out, his thumb brushing her cheek. The touch wasn't tender. It was a claim, a reminder of ownership. The pack grows restless. They whisper that their alpha's mate is barren, a bad omen. Deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't about omens. This was about his pride, his ego, his obsession with his own bloodline. "Perhaps the tonics need more time," she offered, her voice barely a whisper. His eyes narrowed. "Perhaps," he said, though the word held no comfort. "Or perhaps the soil is simply useless." He let the insult hang in the air, a poisoned dart. Without another word, he turned and left. In the quiet that followed, Samira finally let out the breath she had been holding. She was trapped. A prisoner in a stone fortress, a prisoner in her own lie. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her time was running out.
The sun in the scorched wastes was a merciless god. It beat down on the endless sea of orange dunes, promising death to anything that wasn't strong enough or smart enough to survive. Zane, Alpha of the Nomad Kings, was both. He stood atop a towering dune, the wind whipping at his dark hair, his keen eyes scanning the horizon. Below him, his caravan, his pack, was a vibrant, sprawling river of life in the dead heart of the desert. Colorful tents, smoking cook fires, the sound of children laughing, and the low, contented hum of a people who were home, wherever they happened to stop. They survived because their leader was a visionary, a man who could read the shifting sands like a map and see life where others saw only an ending. "Anything?" a voice asked. It was Kenna, his lead scout, her face weathered and kind. Zane pointed to the east. "There's a hidden canyon about 5 miles from here. The rock formations will trap the evening cool. We'll find water there, deep in the stone." Kenna nodded, her trust in him absolute. His pack followed him without question, because he had never led them astray. He had led them to water, to food, to life, time and time again. As she turned to give the order to move, she paused. "Smoke," she said, pointing to a faint, dark smudge on the northern horizon. The Stonefang Fortress. Zane's expression hardened. The Stonefang pack, led by Marcus, was everything he despised. They were a static pack, clinging to a dying piece of rock, their traditions as rigid and brittle as old bones. They hoarded their water, ruled through fear, and measured worth in bloodlines instead of character. They were a festering wound in the wastes. "May the sands have mercy on any who live under the shadow of Marcus," he murmured, his voice a low growl. He had heard stories of the man's cruelty, stories of an obsession with his own legacy that bordered on madness. What must it be like, he wondered, to live in a world so small, so full of fear? On the other hand, their fortress held the only deep-water well in the entire region, a resource that gave Marcus an unnatural amount of power, an open loop of conflict that had yet to be closed. "Let's move," Zane said, turning his back on the smoke. "We have our own people to worry about." He led his caravan east, a king leading his mobile kingdom away from the poison of the past. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He had a feeling that Marcus's shadow was a long one, and it was only a matter of time before it touched them all.
The whispers grew louder, the stares grew colder. Her failure to produce an heir was a sickness in the pack, and she was the source of the infection. She felt their scorn, their pity, their impatience. It was a constant, suffocating pressure. Then, Marcus summoned her again. This time, he didn't come to her. She was brought to his throne room. It was a grand, cold cavern, his throne carved from the same black rock as the fortress walls. He was the mountain, and she was just a pebble at his feet. He was not alone. His most trusted warriors stood guard, their faces grim. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. This was the end. "Samira," he began, his voice echoing in the cavern. He didn't use any endearments. The pretense was over. "I have been patient. The pack has been patient." She stood before him, her chin held high, her pride the only armor she had left. "The ancestors," she began, but he cut her off. "The ancestors have given you a dozen moons to fulfill your duty as my mate," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And you have failed. A barren she-wolf has no value to the pack's legacy. She has no value to me." Each word was a stone, and he was building a wall between them. Or maybe he was building her tomb. She didn't know what scared her more, the truth of his words or the cold, empty void she felt behind them. He felt nothing for her. No love, no hate. Just disappointment. She was a tool that had failed to do its job. She had to try one last time. "Please, Marcus." He raised a hand, silencing her. "The pack grows restless, Samira. They whisper that our bloodline is cursed, that our alpha is weak because his mate is empty." He stood and walked toward her, his every step a deliberate, menacing beat. He circled her, looking her up and down as if she were livestock at a market. "I have given you every chance," he continued, "but my legacy will not be denied. My blood will continue. The pack must be shown that I am strong and that I will cut away any weakness that threatens our future." He stopped in front of her, his icy eyes boring into hers. Her breath caught. She could feel his decision. It was cold and hard and final. As he turned away, he gave his captain of the guard a look, a single chilling look. Then he paused at the door. "The pack needs to be reminded of the price of failure," he said, his voice echoing in the sudden, terrible silence. "Do not make me silence their whispers. Permanently." The threat was no longer veiled. It was a promise. And as the guards stepped toward her, their faces grim, she knew her quiet rebellion was over. Her time had just run out. The guards didn't just escort her. They dragged her. They hauled her from the throne room and into the harsh, unforgiving light of the main courtyard, her feet scraping against the stone. The entire Stonefang pack was there, gathered by some silent command. They stared, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. Then, Marcus appeared on the balcony above, his presence silencing the whispers. He held up the small leather pouch of moon shadow leaves. Her pouch. "For many moons we have wondered," he boomed, his voice a powerful, accusing wave. "We have prayed to the ancestors for a son, for an heir to the Stonefang legacy, but the ancestors have been silent." He paused, letting the drama build. "Today we know why. We have not been cursed by the ancestors. We have been sabotaged by a traitor." He threw the pouch down into the courtyard. It landed at her feet, a small, damning piece of evidence. A gasp rippled through the crowd. "This Omega," Marcus spat the word like a curse, "has been poisoning her own womb. She has willingly made herself barren, denying me a son, denying this pack an heir, and denying our very future." And just like that, the pack's fear turned to rage. The whispers became snarls. She looked out at their faces, faces she had known her entire life, and saw only hatred. They turned on her because their alpha gave them permission, because his lie was easier to believe than the truth of his cruelty. "No," she cried out, her voice raw. "He's a tyrant. I wouldn't bring a child into his—" Before she could finish, a guard backhanded her across the face. Pain exploded in her cheek and she fell to her knees. "For this treason," Marcus declared, his voice ringing with cold finality. "She is stripped of her name. She is stripped of her rank. She is no longer Stonefang. She is nothing. Let the wastes claim her." What followed was a blur of pain and humiliation. The guards dragged her to the great gates of the fortress, her own people spitting and throwing stones at her. They hauled her to the edge of the cliff and, without a final word, shoved her over the side. She tumbled down the steep, sandy embankment, rocks and thorns tearing at her skin. She landed in a heap at the bottom, bruised and bleeding. Above her, the great gates of her home slammed shut, a sound of absolute finality. She was alone. An exile. A ghost in the making, with nothing but the merciless sun as her witness. The scourged wastes were a graveyard. The sun was a hammer, beating down on the cracked orange earth. The air was so hot it felt like breathing fire. In the first few hours, Samira walked. She walked because her pride, the last thing she had left, would not let her die at the foot of Marcus's fortress. By midday, she was crawling. Her throat was a desert of its own, her lips cracked and bleeding. Every instinct screamed for water, for shade, for an end to this torment. More than once, she was tempted to just stop, to let the sun have her. What was the point? What was she even fighting for? But then, she saw it. A patch of thorny, withered-looking vines. Her training, the very knowledge that had gotten her exiled, kicked in. Her body moved on instinct. She used a sharp rock to dig at the base of the plant, unearthing a thick, tuberous root. It was a sunroot, bitter, but full of water. She chewed on the woody pulp, the trickle of moisture in her throat the most exquisite feeling she had ever known. She had survived as long as she had because her knowledge was a weapon against this place. That night, she huddled in the shadow of a rock formation, listening to the howls of feral, maddened wolves who roamed the wastes. They were shifters who had lost their minds to thirst and isolation. Was that her future? To become one of them? For 2 days, she endured. She found water in roots, she ate edible insects, and she avoided the feral packs. She was a survivor, a fighter. But on the 3rd day, her strength finally gave out. The sun was relentless. The last sunroot was a distant memory. She stumbled, her vision blurring, the world a swimming haze of heat and orange sand. She collapsed onto the dunes, the sand hot against her cheek. A shadow fell over her. She looked up, expecting to see a vulture, ready for its meal. Instead, she saw the shimmering shapes of a caravan. It was impossible. A mirage brought on by the heat and her dying mind. Yet, the shapes grew clearer. Large, fur-lined wagons, tall, proud shifters, and a man walking toward her, his silhouette a dark, powerful shape against the blinding sun. Her last thought, before the darkness swallowed her whole, was not one of fear, but of a strange, impossible hope.
His scouts found her by pure chance, a small, crumpled shape half buried in the sand. When Zane arrived, he expected to find another corpse claimed by the wastes. Instead, he found a fighter. She was unconscious, yes. Her body was bruised, her lips were cracked, and she was dangerously dehydrated. But he saw the signs. The hole where she had dug up a sunroot, the discarded husks of thorn beetles nearby. She hadn't just wandered until she died. She had used the waste's own secrets to fight for her life. That alone was impressive. "She's from a static pack, Alpha," one of his scouts said, pointing to the faint, faded mark of a fang on her shoulder. Stonefang. Zane's expression hardened, a refugee from Marcus's tyranny. He felt a familiar mix of pity and contempt for the brutal, stagnant packs that clung to their rocks like dying limpets. He knelt beside her. She was covered in dirt and dried blood, but even in this state there was a strange pride in the line of her jaw, a resilience in the set of her shoulders. He was intrigued because he saw a spark in her, an ember that even the wastes hadn't managed to extinguish. As if sensing his presence, her eyes fluttered open. They were dazed, unfocused, but they held no plea, only a flicker of weary defiance. The moment their eyes locked, something shifted in the air, a strange, silent recognition. He didn't know who she was or what her story was. He just knew she didn't belong to the wastes. But maybe she could belong with them. He took his own water skin from his belt and gently lifted her head, bringing it to her lips. "Drink," he said, his voice calm and steady. She drank, her thirst a desperate, primal thing. When she was done, he made a decision. It was a simple one, based on the one law that governed his entire kingdom. He would take her in because his law stated that all who could contribute belong, and a woman who could survive 3 days in the scourged wastes alone, she could most definitely contribute. "You are safe now," he told her, his voice gentle but firm. "I am Zane, Alpha of this caravan. We will give you shelter and food. You can travel with us." He saw the flicker of shock, then suspicion in her eyes. She didn't know how to react to kindness. What kind of world had she come from? He offered his hand to help her up. After a long moment of hesitation, she took it. Her hand was small and rough in his, but her grip was surprisingly strong. In that moment, he knew he hadn't just found a refugee. He had found something more.
She woke up to the sound of laughter. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. The sound was so alien, so out of place after the grim silence of the fortress and the howling emptiness of the wastes. Her eyes fluttered open. She wasn't in the desert. She was inside a large tent, the walls made of colorful woven fabrics, and the air smelled of strange spices, roasting meat, and 100 living, breathing people. What followed was a dizzying blur of sensations. She sat up, her body aching, and saw the life of the caravan unfolding outside the tent flap. Children with tangled, sun-bleached hair chased each other between wagons. Shifters with kind, weathered faces mended gear, told stories, and shared food around a massive central fire. It was chaotic, vibrant, and more alive than any place she had ever been, and every single person was watching her. As if pulled by a string, the moment she appeared, a hush fell over the camp. The laughter died. The stories stopped. Every eye, curious, suspicious, wary, turned to her. They were wary because the static packs, like the one she came from, were known for their cruelty and deceit. She was an unknown variable, a fox who had just wandered into their henhouse. Her breath caught. She had traded one kind of prison for another. Here, the bars were not stone, but the 100 pairs of eyes that judged her every move. Just then, Zane appeared at her side, his presence a solid, calming anchor in the sea of their suspicion. "They are not used to outsiders," he said, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. "Kindness is a currency my people spend carefully. You must give them a reason to trust you." Deep down, she knew the truth. Her old flaw, the belief that her worth was always on trial, flared up. She had to prove she wasn't a threat. She had to prove she wasn't a useless burden. He led her toward the central fire. "This is Samira," he announced, his voice carrying easily over the camp. "She has seen the cruelty of the wastes. She is under my protection. She will travel with us." The pack was silent, their expressions unreadable. This was not a welcome. It was a test. To make things worse, an old woman with eyes as sharp and bright as a hawk's stepped forward. Her face was a road map of wrinkles, her hands stained with the colors of herbs and dyes. "I am Alara, the caravan's healer," the woman said, her voice raspy. "We will see what kind of spirit the desert has sent us." She looked at Samira, not with malice, but with a deep, penetrating scrutiny that felt even more intimidating. It was the look of someone who could see right through you, and Samira had far too many secrets to hide. Life in the caravan was a lesson in survival. In the Stonefang pack, your worth was determined by your bloodline. Here, it was determined by the skill of your own two hands. Because of that, Samira was given a menial task to prove she wasn't a freeloader. She was put in the supply wagon, tasked with sorting dried goods, herbs, spices, grains, and discarding anything that had gone bad. It was tedious work, but she didn't mind. It was better than the stares, better than the whispers. One afternoon, she was sorting a large sack of valuable crimson spice when she noticed something wrong. To the naked eye, it looked fine. But her healer's training had taught her to look closer. She crumbled a pinch in her palm and saw them. Tiny, almost invisible sand mites, an infestation that would spoil the entire sack within a week. The pack's law was to burn any infested goods to prevent their spread. But this spice was rare, a key ingredient in their healing salves. A whole sack would be a huge loss. Her instincts surged. She knew something the nomads didn't. In her old life, she had spent years studying the delicate, often poisonous life of the desert. Moments later, she was outside the wagon, digging near the roots of a common, scraggly-looking bush. It was called a smokeweed plant. Useless to most. But she knew its secret. That night, she approached Alara, the old healer. "A thought," Samira said, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "Instead of burning the spice, what if you sealed it in a barrel with the smoldering leaves of a smokeweed? The smoke is harmless to the spice, but it is poison to the mites." Alara looked at her, her eyes sharp with suspicion. "That is old knowledge, forgotten knowledge. Where would a refugee from a rock fortress learn such a thing?" Her heart skipped. She had to lie, because telling the truth meant revealing her training, her past, her connection to Marcus. "My grandmother was a healer," she mumbled. "She taught me a few things." It was a weak lie, but it was all she had. Alara stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment, but then she nodded slowly. They tried it. They sealed the spice with the smoking leaves, and by the next morning, the mites were gone, and the spice was saved. What followed was a subtle shift. A few of the nomads gave her small, grudging nods of respect. Zane watched her from across the fire, a thoughtful, impressed look on his face. She had earned a tiny foothold in this new world. But as Alara passed her later, the old healer paused. "You have a healer's sight, girl," she whispered, her voice too low for others to hear. "And a liar's heart. I wonder which one will win in the end." The question hung in the air, a new and dangerous secret between them. The first sign of the plague came 3 days later. It began with a little girl named Nyla, a bright, happy child who suddenly came down with a raging fever. At first, no one was too worried. Sickness happened. Alara, the healer, gave her cooling teas and fever-reducing poultices. But nothing worked. The fever didn't break. In fact, it got worse. The girl grew weak, her breathing shallow, and she began to drift in and out of consciousness. A strange, pale rash appeared on her skin. A quiet fear began to creep through the caravan like a cold fog. This wasn't a normal fever. This was something new. Something wrong. The sickness was terrifying because it was an unknown enemy, and their trusted medicines were useless against it. Samira watched from a distance, her own heart a cold, heavy knot in her chest. Every instinct she had, every fiber of her being as a healer, screamed at her to go to the girl, to examine her, to help. She could feel the sickness from across the camp, a discordant, unnatural hum that made her skin crawl. But what could she do? She had already raised Alara's suspicions. If she revealed the true extent of her knowledge, what other questions would they ask? Who was she? Where did she come from? Her entire life was a lie she had carefully built to protect herself, and revealing her skills could bring it all crashing down. So she did nothing. She watched, and she waited, and she hated herself for it. How could she call herself a healer if she let her own fears stop her from saving a child? That night, the camp was silent. The usual sounds of stories and soft laughter were gone, replaced by a heavy, anxious stillness. Everyone was listening, waiting. Then, a sound cut through the darkness. It was Nyla's mother, a single, desperate, heartbroken wail of a mother watching her child slip away. The sound tore through Samira, ripping away her fear, her caution, her carefully constructed lies. It was the sound of a pain she understood all too well, the pain of being helpless. Deep down, she knew the truth. She could not stand by and do nothing. She didn't know if she could save the girl, but she knew she had to try, no matter the cost to herself. Her secret didn't matter anymore. A child's life did. The mother's cry was a blade in the dark. It cut through Samira's fear, leaving only the raw, undeniable instinct of a healer. She couldn't hide anymore. A child was dying. Her body moved on instinct. She grabbed a small pouch of her own secret herbs, her last link to a life she had fled, and pushed her way through the anxious crowd toward the sick tent. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sickness and despair. The little girl, Nyla, was pale, her skin slick with sweat, her breathing a shallow, rattling thing. Alara, the old healer, looked up, her face a mask of weary defeat. "There is nothing more I can do," Alara whispered, her voice cracking. "Her fever is too high. The spirits are claiming her." "No," Samira said, her own voice surprisingly firm. "Not yet." She knelt beside the child, her hands already working, crushing the herbs she'd brought. "This is a sun fever, but it's twisted, unnatural. A normal cooling poultice won't work." Alara looked at the strange paste Samira was making. "What is that?" "It's a paste of dust rose and serpent's tongue root," Samira explained, her voice low and urgent. "The rose draws out heat, but the serpent's root, it fights the unnatural energy that's fueling the sickness." She had to be careful, because every word she spoke was a betrayal of her own secret identity. The old healer hesitated for a long moment, but then she saw the desperation in the mother's eyes, and she nodded. She trusted Samira because, truth be told, she was completely out of other options. Together, they applied the poultice to the girl's forehead and chest. For a long, agonizing hour, nothing happened. The child's breathing grew weaker. The mother sobbed quietly in the corner. But then, just as all hope seemed lost, something shifted. A single drop of sweat beaded on Nyla's nose. Then another. The violent shivering subsided, and her breathing, while still shallow, grew steadier. The fever had broken. It wasn't a cure. The strange rash was still there, the weakness still profound. But it was a reprieve. It was life. In the quiet that followed, the mother's sobs turned to tears of relief. Alara looked at Samira, her sharp eyes full of a new, unsettling mixture of gratitude and deep suspicion. That night, as Samira tried to slip back into the shadows of the camp, a figure blocked her path. It was Zane. His face was unreadable in the firelight, but his presence was a wall she could not get past. "The girl is stable," he said. It wasn't a question. She just nodded. Ilara says the remedy you used is from the old texts, almost forgotten knowledge. He took a step closer, his height and power a suddenly intimidating thing. You are more than just a refugee from a static pack, aren't you? You didn't just survive the wastes by luck. Who are you, Samira? His question hung in the air, a hook she couldn't escape. Her past was no longer a distant memory. It was a shadow that had finally caught up to her. The ride to the oasis was silent and tense. Zane had insisted she come with him, his face a grim mask of determination. He said he wanted her to see the place where they had last drawn water, to see if she could sense what was wrong. The unspoken truth was that this was a test, her test. They left the caravan behind, the silence of the desert pressing in on them. The oasis was a small, beautiful place, a patch of impossible green in a world of orange and brown. Palm trees swayed in the hot breeze. The water was clear and cool. It looked perfect, but it felt wrong. The air was heavy. The birds were silent. A strange, unnatural stillness hung over the place. "What do you see?" Zoin asked, his voice low. She didn't know what to look for. She walked the edge of the pool, her eyes scanning the rocks, the plants, the water itself. Everything looked normal. Yet, the feeling of wrongness, of a discordant hum just beneath the surface of reality, grew stronger with every step. And then she saw it. A faint, dark, oily residue clinging to the rocks just beneath the waterline. It was almost invisible, something anyone else would have missed. Her heart skipped. She knelt, her fingers trembling as she scraped a small amount of the black paste from the rock. It was gritty, like sand, but it had a strange, bitter smell. A smell that was faint, but sickeningly familiar. As if pulled by a string, a memory surfaced. A memory of a dark, damp cave beneath the Stonefang fortress. A memory of Marcus's private apothecary, where his poison masters worked in secret. A memory of a single, rare, black lichen that grew only in those deep, dark places. Black vein lichen, the core ingredient in a poison so subtle, so slow-acting, that it mimicked a wasting sickness perfectly. A poison only she, as the Alpha's former mate and a master healer, would ever be able to identify. Deep down she knew the truth. It was a truth so monstrous it made her sick to her stomach. This wasn't a natural plague. This wasn't a random sickness from the wastes. This was a weapon. This was an assassination. And she knew exactly who had fired the first shot. Her world tilted. The weight of the revelation was crushing. The sickness that was killing Zane's people. She had brought it with her. Her past wasn't just a shadow, it was a monster, and it had followed her here to destroy the only sanctuary she had ever known. She looked at Zane, her face pale, her eyes wide with a horror he couldn't possibly understand yet. "This isn't a sickness," she said, her voice a choked, trembling thing. "It's poison." Her breath caught. "And I know who's responsible."
The words hung in the air, heavy and terrible. Poison. Zane stared at her, at the raw, undisguised horror on her face, and he felt a cold dread wash over him. It was happening again. The ghost of his past, the plague that had destroyed his first home, had found him. That night, in the quiet intimacy of his private tent, she told him everything. He listened, his face a mask of stone, as the story spilled out of her. Her name was Samira. She was the mate of Alpha Marcus of the Stonefang. She was a master healer, trained in secret, and she had been exiled not for being barren, but for deliberately using her knowledge to defy her Alpha's cruel legacy. He listened to her tale of quiet rebellion, of her desperate lie, and of her final brutal exile. He listened as she described the black vein poison, a signature creation of Marcus's pack, and as he listened, the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The strange sickness, her impossible knowledge, the attack on this specific oasis. It all made a terrible, perfect sense. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the tent. She sat before him, trembling, her secrets finally laid bare. She looked like she expected him to cast her out, to blame her for bringing this death to his doorstep. Instead, he felt a surge of something that stunned him. It wasn't anger at her. It was a white-hot, righteous fury at Marcus, and for her, for this impossible, brave, defiant woman, he felt a profound, aching respect. He finally understood. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a rebel, a quiet warrior who had fought a long, lonely war against a tyrant. She was everything his people, the nomads, represented: resilience, defiance, and a refusal to bow to a cruel world. He believed her because her story was not just a confession, it was a testament to her strength. "My first pack," he said, his voice a low, rough thing full of old pain, "was destroyed by a poisoned well. We trusted a neighboring alpha. He wanted our land. We were naive. I was the only one who survived." The moment their eyes locked, the space between them changed. They were no longer just an alpha and a refugee. They were two survivors of the same kind of evil. Two lonely souls who understood each other's scars without needing to ask. "He is poisoning the wastes," Zane continued, his voice hardening into a low growl. "He is trying to exterminate us, to take the last of the water for himself." Samira nodded, her eyes full of a new, fierce light. "He won't stop," she whispered. "Not until he has everything." He looked at her, at the woman who had been cast out, the woman who held the key to this entire conflict. She was their only hope, and he was her only ally. "If Marcus created the poison," Zane said, the words a grim, heavy vow, "then the antidote must be in his fortress." And just like that, their path was laid bare. A dangerous, impossible path that led directly back into the heart of the home that had tried to destroy her.
Hope was a fragile, desperate thing. Now that they knew the enemy, a new, frantic energy filled the caravan. Samira, no longer an outcast, became the quiet center of the storm. She worked day and night with Alara in the healing tent, her hands stained with herbs, her mind racing through years of forgotten lessons. They created tonics that could slow the poison, that could ease the suffering, but they couldn't cure it. The poison was a shadow, slowly creeping over the pack, touching the weakest first, the very old and the very young. Every pained whimper, every feverish moan was a whip against Samira's soul. This was her fault, her past, her monster. "There's something missing," she muttered late one night, staring at a complex herbal chart she had drawn in the dirt. A catalyst, an agent to bind the cure and neutralize the Black Vein's core. Alara looked at her, her wise old eyes full of a new, deep respect. "You have given us more time, child. That is a gift in itself." But time wasn't a cure. It was just a slower death. As the silence stretched, Samira closed her eyes, forcing her mind back to the dusty scrolls in Marcus's forbidden library, back to the whispers of the old healers she had secretly learned from. There was a legend, a story about a flower that bloomed only in the highest cliffs of the territory, a flower that held the moon's own cleansing light in its petals. Her eyes snapped open. "Moonglow," she breathed. The name hung in the air, a whisper of impossible hope. The Moonglow flower. It was the only thing powerful enough to counteract the darkness of the Black Vein lichen. It was their only chance, and it only grew in one place in the entire world: the high, treacherous cliffs that overlooked the Stonefang fortress. Deep down, she knew the truth. The path to her new family's salvation led directly through the gates of her old hell. There was no other way. She had to go back. That's why she went to the Pack Council, her head held high. She stood before Zane and his most trusted warriors and laid out her discovery. She explained the legend, the cure, and the location. The moment their eyes locked, she saw he understood. "The cliffs are treacherous," one of the warriors growled, "and they are deep in Marcus's territory. It's a suicide mission." I am the only one who knows the hidden paths up the rock face, Samira said, her voice clear and steady, with a strength she didn't know she possessed. I am the only one who knows exactly what the flower looks like. I have to be the one to go. She was committing to this, to them, to this new life, with every fiber of her being.
The council tent was thick with doubt. Zayn listened as his best warriors voiced their concerns. They were practical concerns. Logical ones. The mission was too risky. The girl was still an unknown. Sending a team so deep into enemy territory would leave the caravan vulnerable. He listened to them all, his face a mask of stone. He heard their words, but he was watching Samira. He saw the quiet, unbending steel in her spine. He saw the fierce, protective fire in her eyes. This wasn't the broken refugee he had found in the sand. This was a leader. This was a queen. He trusted her. He trusted her more than he had trusted anyone in a very long time. She is right, Zayn said, his voice cutting through the arguments. The tent fell silent. She knows the way. Her knowledge is our only advantage. But to risk our best warriors on the word of an outsider? One of them began, but Zayn silenced him with a single sharp glare. She is not an outsider, he stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. She is the heart of this fight. She is one of us. He had to make them see, because if they couldn't trust her, they had already lost. He stood, his presence filling the tent. I will not send her alone. I will lead the mission myself. A stunned silence. The pack's alpha leaving the caravan on a high-risk mission was almost unheard of. It was a declaration of absolute faith. I will take Kenna and Jax and 3 of our best climbers, he continued, his gaze sweeping over his council. The rest of you will stay and defend the caravan. That is my command. There were no more arguments. His word was law. But this felt different. It was more than a command. It was a testament. He was staking his life, his authority, and the future of their people on this woman and her impossible plan. Later, as they prepared for the journey, he found her packing dried herbs and bandages. He approached her holding out a long, beautifully crafted knife, its handle wrapped in dark leather. She looked from the blade to his face, confused. In my pack, he said, his voice softer now. Healers are warriors too. We don't just mend what is broken. We fight for what is alive. Her fingers trembled as she took the knife. It was heavy, solid, a promise, a symbol that she was no longer just a guest or a refugee. She was a warrior of the nomad kings, and he, their king, was going to walk into the fire with her.
They were supposed to leave at dawn. The small team was assembled, their packs filled, their faces a mixture of grim determination and nervous energy. The entire caravan was on edge, a collective breath held in anticipation of the desperate mission to come. But the plague did not wait for the sun. A cry went up from the healing tent, a cry of pure, heartbreaking anguish. It was Nyla's mother. Samira's heart stopped. She ran, Zayn right behind her. They pushed their way into the tent to see the little girl, the first one to fall ill, lying still in her mother's arms. The partial cure Samira had created had given her more time, but it hadn't been enough. The poison had finally won. The life had gone from her eyes. The silence that fell over the caravan was a profound, devastating thing. It was one thing to fight an unknown enemy. It was another thing to bury its first victim. The loss was a physical blow, a thief that had stolen the light from their community. Samira felt a wave of guilt so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. She had failed. Her knowledge, her skills. They weren't enough. What if the moon glow didn't work? What if this was all for nothing? To make things worse, the death of the child turned the pack's anxiety into a quiet, simmering rage. Their mission was no longer just a strategic necessity to save their people. It had become a sacred vow. It was a promise to a little girl who would never laugh again. It was a quest for vengeance. That night, as the pack mourned, Samira stood alone on a dune, looking out at the vast, empty darkness of the wastes. The weight of it all felt like it was going to crush her. She heard footsteps in the sand behind her. It was Zane. He came to stand beside her, not speaking, just sharing the silence. The space between them was filled with a shared grief. "This is my fault," she whispered, the words a painful confession. "If I had been faster, if I had known more—" "No," he said, his voice a firm, solid anchor in her sea of guilt. He turned to her, his golden eyes glowing in the moonlight. "This is Marcus's fault, and we are going to make him pay." He reached out, his hand gently taking hers. His touch was warm, strong, a silent promise in the cold desert night. Without another word, they stood together, two leaders looking out at the darkness, their mission now a sacred, unbreakable bond. They would not fail again. They couldn't. The journey was a blur of grim determination. They moved fast and silent, a small band of ghosts against the vast, empty canvas of the desert. Zane led them with an unerring sense of direction, his face a mask of stone. But Samira could feel his grief, a cold, hard thing just beneath the surface. It mirrored her own. The death of the child, Nyla, was a wound they all shared. After 2 days of relentless travel, they reached the great cliffs that bordered the Stonefang territory. The fortress was a dark, jagged crown on the horizon. "The moonglow flowers only bloom on the highest ledge," she whispered to Zane, pointing to a treacherous-looking sliver of rock near the summit. "There's a hidden path, a series of handholds on the eastern face. Marcus doesn't know about it. It's the only way." She had to be right. Their lives, and the lives of the entire caravan, depended on it. What followed was a climb that tested the limits of their strength and courage. The wind was a physical blow, trying to tear them from the rock face. With every heartbeat, a loose rock would skitter down into the darkness below, a terrifying reminder of how close they were to death. Samira, though not a warrior, was surprisingly agile, her small frame an advantage on the narrow ledges. She led the way, her knowledge of the path their only guide. Eventually, gasping for breath, they pulled themselves over the final ledge, and found Marcus waiting for them. He wasn't alone. A dozen of his most elite warriors stood with him, their weapons drawn, their faces cruel masks in the pale moonlight. The moonglow flowers bloomed all around them, their soft silver petals a beautiful tragic backdrop to a perfect trap. Zane and his warriors immediately moved to shield her, their own weapons flashing in the dark. "Samira, Samira," Marcus said, his voice a low, mocking purr. "Did you really think I wouldn't have the only antidote to my own poison guarded?" He looked from her to Zane, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "And you must be the Nomad King. How brave of you to walk so willingly into my parlor." The air thickened, the space between them burning with hatred. She had led them here. She had led them straight to their deaths. Deep down, she knew the truth. Her past was a cage she could never truly escape.
There was no thought, no strategy. There was only the battle. Zane roared, a sound of pure, primal fury, and launched himself at Marcus. His warriors met the Stonefang guards, and the narrow cliffside exploded into a chaotic symphony of steel and snarls. He fought with the strength of a king and the desperation of a man with everything to lose. He had to protect Samira. He had to get the flowers. He had to win. But they were outnumbered, and Marcus's warriors were fighting on their home turf. It was a brutal, ugly fight. For every one of Marcus's men they took down, another seemed to take his place. He saw Jax, the youngest of his warriors, fighting bravely, but he was being overwhelmed by two larger brutes. Zane tried to get to him, but Marcus met his charge, their axes clashing with a scream of tortured metal. "She was mine first, Nomad," Marcus snarled, his face a mask of possessive rage. "Her knowledge, her skills, they belong to my legacy." Zane felt a cold dread. This wasn't just about the oases anymore. This was about her. Marcus didn't just want to stop them. He wanted his prize back. Then, the unthinkable happened. One of Marcus's warriors got past his guard. The man wasn't aiming for him, though. He was aiming for Samira. But Jax, the brave young warrior, threw himself in the way, taking a blow that was meant for her. He went down, a cry of pain torn from his lips. In the span of a breath, Marcus's men had him, a blade pressed tight against his throat. The fighting stopped. "Enough!" Marcus bellowed, a triumphant look in his eyes. He held the struggling Jax as a shield. "A stalemate, I believe." Zane stood panting, his heart a block of ice in his chest. He was trapped. He was a king with no kingdom, a warrior with no moves left to make. He felt this powerlessness because Marcus held the life of one of his children in his hands. Marcus's cold eyes shifted to Samira. "But I am a generous alpha," he said, his voice slick with poison. "I will offer you a trade, the boy's life, and a pouch full of all the moonglow you could ever need, in exchange for you. Surrender yourself to me, Samira. Return to your rightful place at my side, or watch this boy die, and return to your caravan to watch the rest of them follow."
The world went silent. All she could hear was the frantic pounding of her own heart and the terrified, choked breaths of the young warrior, Jax. He was just a boy who had taken a blade for her. "Don't do it, Samira," Zane growled, his voice a low, desperate plea. "Don't even think about it." But how could she not? She looked at Jax's face, at the fear in his young eyes, and she saw Nyla, the little girl who had already died. She couldn't let it happen again. She couldn't be the cause of another death. This was her fault, her monster, her responsibility. Maybe this was her true purpose. Not to be a healer, or a queen, or a mate, but to be a sacrifice. "Let him go first," she said, her voice a strange, hollow thing that didn't sound like her own. Marcus's smile was a predator's grin. "Of course!" "No!" Zane roared, taking a step toward her, but his own warriors held him back. There was nothing he could do. She dropped the knife he had given her. It clattered on the stone, the sound of her surrender. With every step she took toward Marcus, she felt a piece of her new life, her new hope, dying. She was walking back into her cage, willingly. She stopped in front of him. "Now let him go," she whispered. Marcus honored the deal, in his own cruel way. He shoved Jax toward Zane's men, and at the same time, he tossed a small leather pouch onto the ground. The antidote. Then, his hand clamped down on her arm like a manacle of iron. "A pleasure doing business with you, Nomad King," Marcus sneered. And just like that, everything was lost. He began to drag her back toward the fortress, his warriors closing in around them. She looked back one last time, her eyes finding Zane's. She saw a look of such profound, helpless agony on his face that it shattered what was left of her heart. She had saved his pack, but she had lost him. She had lost herself. As the great stone gates of the Stonefang fortress groaned shut behind her, plunging her back into the world of darkness and silence she had just escaped, a single devastating thought echoed in her mind. "I am home, and I am lost forever." Her old chambers in the Stonefang fortress were no longer a home. They were a cage. A gilded, luxurious cage, but a cage nonetheless. For days, she existed in a gray, hopeless fog. She had saved Zane's people, yes, but she had lost her freedom, her future, and the only man she had ever loved. What was the point of it all? Then, Marcus came to her. He didn't come as a mate, but as a conqueror. He brought her fine food and silks, not as gifts, but as trophies. "You should be thanking me," he said, his voice a low, self-satisfied purr. "I have restored you to your rightful place. The pack sees your return as a sign of my strength." She just stared at him, her heart a cold, dead stone in her chest. He mistook her silence for submission and began to gloat, and in his gloating, he revealed the true, monstrous scope of his ambition. "The nomads will have their cure for a time," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. but it won't matter. Soon there will be no other oases for them to find. I have my men poisoning them all, one by one, not with the plague, but with a salt brine that will render them barren for generations. Her blood ran cold. He wasn't just trying to kill Zane's pack, he was trying to kill the desert itself. The wastes will become a true dead zone, he continued, his eyes gleaming with a mad light. A buffer of death around my fortress, and I, with my deep water well, will be the undisputed king of all life in this region. Every drop of water will be mine to control. Every soul will bow to me or die of thirst. And just like that, the fog of her despair burned away, replaced by a cold, sharp, and utterly pure rage. This wasn't about his legacy anymore. This wasn't about her. This was about a madman trying to murder the world. She realized then that her fight wasn't over. It had just begun. Her despair had been a selfish thing. But this new fury, this was for the land itself, for every creature that depended on it, for every nomad who would die of thirst because of this monster's ambition. She had to stop him, not just for Zane, but for everyone. That night, she didn't weep. She planned. Her body moved on instinct, her mind sharp and clear. She found flammable oils used to polish the furniture. She found dried herbs in a forgotten decorative pouch that, when mixed, would burn with a thick, choking smoke. She found the loose stone in the floor where she had once hidden her contraceptive herbs. Her old rebellion was about to become the seed of a new one. She would not be a prisoner in his story. She would be the fire that burned his kingdom to the ground.
The journey back to the caravan was the longest of Zane's life. The small pouch of moonglow petals in his hand felt both as heavy as a mountain and as light as ash. He had the cure, but he had lost the healer. He had won the battle but lost the war. When they arrived, the caravan was a place of quiet, desperate mourning. But the moment they saw the pouch in his hand, hope, fragile and fierce, ignited. They worked through the night, Ilara and the other healers grinding the precious petals, mixing the antidote, and one by one the sick began to recover. The fevers broke, the rashes faded, the life returned to their eyes. He had saved them. Samira's sacrifice had saved them. But the victory was hollow. It tasted like ash in his mouth. What was a kingdom without its queen? What was a future without her in it? He stood on the high dune, looking north toward the fortress that held her, and he felt a cold, hard resolve settle in his bones. He had spent his life running, surviving, building a new world out of the wreckage of the old one. But he was done running. You cannot build a new world if you let the monsters of the old one continue to stand. He had to get her back, not just because he loved her, but because she was the future. Her wisdom, her strength, her healer's heart. That was the true legacy his people needed. That night, he called his warriors. They were weak, still recovering, but their eyes burned with a new fire. They had been saved by the outsider, the woman their alpha had trusted. Now she was a prisoner of the monster who had tried to kill them all. Marcus believes he has won, Zane said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that carried over the silent crowd. He believes we are a scattered, broken people who will crawl away and die. He is wrong. He unrolled a map in the sand, a map only he could read. He guards his walls. He watches the dunes, but he has forgotten the heart of the wastes. He has forgotten the old ways. He drew a line on the map, a line that went beneath the earth. There is an underground river system, a network of tunnels that runs from these hills to the very well that sits in the heart of his fortress. A gasp went through the warriors. It was a suicide mission, a reckless, impossible plan. We will not attack his walls, Zane declared, his golden eyes blazing with the light of the fire. We will rise up from the heart of his fortress and take the water that is the source of his power. We will not just rescue Samira. We will liberate the wastes from his tyranny once and for all. A roar of approval, deep and guttural, shook the desert night. The caravan was no longer a moving sanctuary. It had become a storm, gathering its strength, ready to crash down on the fortress of stone and shadow.
The fortress was a tinderbox, and she was about to provide the spark. From her window, she saw the signs, the increased patrols, the nervous energy of the guards. Marcus was preparing for something. Did he suspect Zane would come for her? Or was he preparing for the next stage of his conquest? It didn't matter. She was ready. As the sky darkened, she put her plan into motion. She crept from her chambers, a ghost in the halls she knew so well. She moved toward the fortress's grain stores, the heart of their food supply. She worked quickly, her hands sure, placing her bundles of oily herbs and flammable reagents in the driest part of the silo. She didn't just start a fire. She created a chemical reaction. A thick, acrid smoke that would billow through the fortress, a signal of chaos. But then, she didn't run. Instead, she made her way to the dungeons. To the cells where Marcus kept his other prisoners, shifters from other packs, desert traders who had displeased him, his own people who had dared to question his rule. They were the forgotten ones, the kindling for her rebellion. Using a stolen key, she opened the cells. The prisoners stared at her, their eyes wide with disbelief. "Who are you?" one of them rasped. "I am the woman who is going to burn this place to the ground," she said, her voice a low, fierce thing. "Marcus's guards are distracted by the fire. The armory is 2 levels up. If you want your freedom, now is the time to take it." Hope, more powerful than any fire, blazed in their eyes. Just as a full-blown prison riot began to erupt, she felt it. A tremor in the stone beneath her feet, a shift in the air, a familiar, beloved scent rising from the grates of the great well in the central courtyard. Zayn. He was here. Her heart leaped. He had come for her. Her fire from within, and his storm from without. They were a pincer, ready to crush the life out of Marcus's reign of terror. The fortress was now a war zone. Alarms blared. Men shouted. Smoke filled the air. And in the midst of the chaos, she grabbed a fallen guard's blade, its weight feeling right in her hand. She was no longer a healer, a victim, or a prisoner. She was a rebel, a warrior. And she began to fight her way through the chaos, toward the one place she knew Marcus would be, his throne room. It was time to face the monster of her past, not as a sacrifice, but as his executioner. The doors to the throne room slammed open, crashing against the stone walls. Samira stood there, no longer a trembling Omega, but a warrior queen silhouetted by the smoke and fire of her own rebellion. The guard's blade in her hand felt light. It felt right. Marcus was there, his face a mask of incandescent rage. "You!" he roared, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "You were supposed to be a broken, barren little thing, a footnote in my story." "You were wrong," she said, her voice calm and clear over the distant sounds of battle. He charged her, a beast of pure, wounded pride. She met him, not with equal force, but with a clever, desperate grace. She was not a trained warrior, but she was a survivor. She parried his clumsy, rage-fueled blows, using his own momentum against him, staying just out of his reach. But then, just as he cornered her against the throne, a new sound erupted from the courtyard below. The sound of a horn, clear and strong, the sound of the nomads. At the same time, the floor grate of the great well burst open, and Zane's warriors began pouring into the heart of the fortress. The last of Marcus's personal guard looked back and forth from the battle raging outside to the impossible fight happening within. This was her moment, her one and only chance. "He's been lying to you!" she shouted, her voice ringing with a power she didn't know she had. "All of you!" Marcus laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "They will not listen to you, little traitor." "Won't they?" she countered, her eyes sweeping over the guards. "He tells you he is building a great legacy, a strong pack that will last for 1,000 years. But he is poisoning the oases, not just the ones the nomads use, but all of them." A flicker of doubt. She saw it in their eyes. "He wants to be the king of the desert," she continued, her voice rising with passion. "But what happens when the desert dies? When the sand and the salt creep up to these very walls? What good is a fortress with the only well when the land for 100 miles is a graveyard? He isn't building you a legacy. He is digging your tomb. The truth, once spoken, was a powerful, undeniable thing. The guards looked from her to their furious alpha, and then at the battle raging outside. They saw the nomads fighting with a desperate courage to save their home, and they finally saw the truth of their own alpha's mad, self-destructive ambition. He would lead them all to ruin because his pride was more important than their survival. And just like that, it was over. The captain of the guard, a man who had served Marcus for 20 years, slowly lowered his blade. One by one, the others followed. Marcus stared, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. He had been defeated, not by a stronger warrior, but by a simple, inescapable truth. His own people, his own legacy, had just cast him out.
He found them in the throne room. Zane burst in with his warriors to see a sight that stopped him in his tracks. Marcus was on his knees, surrounded by his own guards, his face a mask of broken fury. And standing before him, blade held steady, was Samira. She was the one in command. The moment their eyes locked, the battle rage in his veins cooled, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated awe. He had come here to rescue a prisoner. Instead, he had found a queen who had just conquered a kingdom. What followed was a tense, dangerous standoff. His nomads, fierce and victorious, faced the remaining Stone Fang warriors, who were now leaderless and confused. The air was thick with generations of hatred, a single wrong move away from another bloodbath. But then, Samira stepped between them. She wasn't an alpha giving a command. She was a healer speaking to the wounded. "The fight is over," she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. Marcus was the disease, the poison. The rest of us, we are all just survivors of the wastes. She looked from the faces of his nomads to the faces of the Stonefang warriors. "This fortress has a well. My people have knowledge of the open desert. Alone, we are dying. Together, we might just live." He had to step in, because this was his moment to lead. But he didn't. He stayed silent, watching her. He knew this was no longer his moment. It was hers. He watched as she began to organize them, her authority natural and unquestioned. She sent the healers from both packs to tend to the wounded, no matter which side they fought for. She ordered the grain stores opened and food prepared for everyone. She wasn't giving orders. She was mending a broken body. She was healing a fractured pack. He had been right. Her knowledge was their greatest advantage. But he had been wrong about what kind of knowledge it was. It wasn't just about herbs and roots. It was about people, about community, about life. She was a healer of nations. In that moment, he knew he wasn't just in love with her. He was her devoted follower. He would follow her to the ends of the wastes and back, because he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that she was the one who would finally lead them all home.
Months later, the Stonefang Fortress was no longer a place of stone and shadow. It was a place of green and light. The barren courtyards were now filled with thriving gardens, irrigated by the waters of the Great Well. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the sounds of a new, unified people working together. The nomads' adaptability and the fortress dwellers' resources had combined to create something new, something strong, something hopeful. They didn't call her Samira, the former maid of Marcus, anymore. They had given her a new name. They called her the Oasis Maker. She stood on the balcony where Marcus had once proclaimed her exile, looking down at the new life she had cultivated. Children from both packs were playing in the shade of a newly planted fruit grove. Her legacy wasn't a son, it was a nation. Her children were not of her womb, but of her wisdom and her will. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her from behind. Zayn. He didn't feel like an alpha claiming his mate. He felt like a partner, an equal. "Look at what you've built," he murmured, his voice full of a quiet pride that made her heart swell. "We built," she corrected softly, leaning back against his chest. The space between them was no longer filled with tension or unspoken questions. It was filled with a deep, peaceful, and abiding love. "The first harvest is next week," he said. "The pack wants to hold a celebration, in your honor." She smiled, a true, easy smile, a smile she had never known in her old life. "I think the land is the one that deserves the honor," she replied. He turned her in his arms, his golden eyes soft and full of a love that was her truest sanctuary. "The land is only as good as the healer who tends it," he said. And as he lowered his head to kiss her, a kiss not of desperate beginnings, but of a quiet, happy future, she knew she had finally found the truth she had been searching for her entire life. A person's worth wasn't measured by their bloodline or their secrets or the pain they had endured. It was measured by the life they chose to build. And here, in the arms of the Nomad King, in the heart of the oasis she had made from a wasteland, she had built a beautiful life indeed.